What if ancient America was not brought to its knees by war, invasion, or some mysterious disappearance, but by the sky itself? For generations, great societies rose across North America. They built earthworks aligned to the heavens, raised massive ceremonial centers, managed farmland with astonishing skill, and connected distant peoples through trade networks stretching across rivers, forests, deserts, and plains. To outsiders looking back, these worlds can seem stable, almost timeless, but they were not. They depended on rain arriving when it should, rivers flooding in rhythms people understood, and seasons keeping the promises they had always kept before. Then something changed. Across different regions of ancient North America, climate began to shift in ways communities could not easily predict. Droughts lingered, crops failed, rivers narrowed, forests changed, entire settlements were abandoned, sacred places lost their crowds, roads that once carried goods and pilgrims fell silent, families moved, alliances broke, old leaders lost authority. New ways of living had to be invented or people perished. This is the story of a disaster that did not happen in a single night and did not strike in only one place. It unfolded over generations. It was slow enough for people to hope it might end, but harsh enough to unravel worlds. And in many ways, it changed ancient America forever. Before we talk about collapse, we need to talk about balance. Ancient societies across North America were deeply skilled at living within their environments. In the Mississippi Valley, communities cultivated maize, beans, and squash while drawing on rich floodplain soils. In the Southwest, farmers engineered their lives around scarce water, building settlements where every rainstorm mattered. In the eastern woodlands, people managed forests, hunted game, gathered wild foods, and developed farming systems tied to local conditions. These were not primitive communities blindly dependent on nature. They were observant, adaptive, and intelligent. But even the most resilient society has limits. Agriculture depends on timing. Ceremonial authority often depends on the power to predict cycles, seasons, harvests, celestial events, renewal. Trade depends on surplus. Population growth depends on food security. Once climate begins to shift, every part of society feels the strain. The problem is not just hunger. The problem is that hunger destabilizes everything built on top of a reliable world. And in ancient America, many societies had built a great deal. Large ceremonial centers rose and fell over centuries. Regional powers expanded. Trade routes carried copper, shell, stone, pigments, and stories. Religious life and connected communities to sacred landscapes and cosmic order. Yet this order had an environmental foundation. When that foundation cracked, societies faced the hardest question any civilization can face. How do you preserve your world when the world itself is changing? Few places reveal this struggle more dramatically than the ancient Southwest. For centuries, ancestral Puebloan communities built remarkable settlements across what is now the American Southwest. They farmed in demanding landscapes, captured runoff, used local water knowledge, and created villages and great houses in places that still amaze archaeologists today. Chaco Canyon, Mesa Verde, and many other sites testify to long traditions of planning, community labor, and ceremonial life. But the Southwest always lived close to the edge of water security. Rainfall was variable even in good times. A few failed seasons could be endured. A truly prolonged drought was something else. During major drought episodes, especially the severe dry periods that struck in the late first and second millennia, harvests became unreliable across wide regions. Fields that had sustained villages no longer produced enough. Timber became harder to obtain in some places. Springs weakened, stored food disappeared. Tensions likely rose between neighboring communities competing for shrinking resources. People adapted as long as they could. They changed settlement patterns, they diversified where possible, they moved to more defensible or more sustainable locations, they reorganized. But eventually, many major centers were abandoned. Chaco's great system faded. Mesa Verde's cliff dwellings, so dramatic today, were not eternal refuges. By the late 1200s, Many communities had left those areas behind. This was not a simple story of vanishing. People did not disappear. They moved, reformed communities, carried traditions with them, and survived in new ways. Yet the landscapes they left behind became evidence of something profound. Climate stress could break apart even highly organized societies with deep ecological knowledge. In the Southwest, drought was not merely bad weather, it was a civilization-changing force. Far to the east, another great experiment in human organization rose in a very different environment. Near present-day St. Louis, the city we call Cahokia became one of the largest and most influential urban centers in pre-Columbian North America. It featured immense earthen mounds, planned spaces, elite power, ritual architecture, and a population that, at its height, may have rivaled or exceeded many contemporary European towns in scale. It stood at the heart of a broader Mississippian world of farming, communities, ceremonial centers, and regional connections. At first glance, Cahokia seems far removed from the water anxieties of the Southwest. It sat in a fertile river region, not a desert, but abundance can be fragile too. Mississippian societies relied heavily on maize agriculture, and dense populations require consistent yields. Floodplains can nourish life, but they can also become unstable under changing climate conditions. Too much rain can be as destructive as too little. Flooding, erosion, unpredictable growing seasons, or repeated environmental stress can undermine confidence in leadership and ritual authority just as effectively as drought. Scholars continue to debate the exact mix of causes behind Cahokia's decline: political tensions, social conflict, overuse of local resources, disease, ideological shifts, and environmental stress likely interacted, but climate instability appears to have been part of the larger picture. The medieval climate anomaly and its shifting regional effects may have influenced rainfall patterns, flooding regimes, and agricultural reliability in ways that contributed to long-term vulnerability. What matters most is this: even a center as powerful as Cahokia was not invulnerable. By the 13th and 14th centuries, much of Cahokia's population had dispersed. Monumental activity waned. The great center lost the energy that had once made it extraordinary. Just as in the Southwest, people did not vanish from history. They moved, reorganized, and continued in descendant communities. But an old order had broken, and climate may have helped push it toward the edge. Climate disasters rarely destroy societies all by themselves. This is one of the most important lessons from ancient America. A drought does not automatically cause collapse. A flood does not automatically end a civilization. What climate does is expose weaknesses, magnify inequalities, and place enormous stress on systems that once looked stable. If food becomes scarce, some people may still eat while others starve. If leaders claim ritual authority over natural cycles, failed harvests can shatter trust in that authority. If trade networks weaken, communities lose access to critical goods. If migration begins, old territorial boundaries become unstable. Environmental pressure can become political pressure. Political pressure can become violence. Violence can make recovery even harder. Archaeology sometimes reveals this chain of stress in indirect ways: fortified settlements, evidence of nutritional decline, shifts in burial practice, sudden changes in settlement size, increasing movement into defensive terrain, abandoned ceremonial centers, and the fragmentation of once connected cultural systems. These signs do not always point to one dramatic event. More often, they point to years of strain piling upon strain. Imagine being a farmer whose grandparents knew exactly when the rain should come. Imagine being a spiritual leader whose ceremonies once seemed tied to cosmic order. Imagine being a trader whose roots now cross landscapes emptied by hunger or conflict. Climate change does not merely threaten survival, it threatens meaning. It makes inherited knowledge feel uncertain. It turns the familiar into a question mark. That may be the deepest disaster of all.
And yet, to focus only on collapse is to miss the courage of the people who endured it. Ancient Americans were not passive victims waiting for catastrophe. They responded creatively, Even under immense pressure, communities moved to new valleys, river corridors, and defensible mesas. Farming techniques shifted, alliances changed, ritual traditions were adapted to new landscapes, oral memory preserved what monumental architecture could not. Families carried seeds, stories, and sacred obligations into uncertain futures. In some regions, populations concentrated. In others, they dispersed. Some centers gained importance as others faded. New identities emerged from old networks. This is one reason archaeologists must be careful. Abandoned sites can give the illusion of disappearance, when the real story is movement and transformation. The people of ancient North America did not simply lose a world. They remade life after that world was broken. That is a harder story to tell because it does not fit the romance of ruins. Ruins are dramatic. Survival is quieter, but survival is often the more important achievement. When we look at a deserted great house in the Southwest, or a silent mound center in the Mississippi Valley, we should not imagine a people erased. We should imagine descendants carrying memory forward, adapting under pressure, preserving fragments of old ceremonial knowledge, and choosing life even when the climate turned against them. That is not failure, that is endurance. This ancient story feels uncomfortably familiar. Today, climate change is discussed with satellites, models, and global summits. Ancient America had none of those tools, but the core human experience is recognizable. Uncertainty in the weather, stress on food systems, displacement, political tension, and the fear that the environment people depend on is becoming less predictable. Ancient societies show us two truths at once. First, even sophisticated, organized civilizations can be destabilized by climate stress. Engineering skill, religious authority, trade wealth, and political power do not guarantee safety when environmental systems begin to shift. Second, people are capable of adaptation, mobility, and reinvention. Collapse is never the whole story. Transformation follows, though often at a terrible cost. The lesson is not that climate inevitably destroys civilization. The lesson is that climate pressure can change the terms on which civilization exists. It can rearrange geography, power, belief, and memory. And once that process begins, returning to the old normal may be impossible. In ancient North America, some communities managed to endure by changing where and how they lived. Others lost the centers that once defined them. Across the continent, climate was not the only actor in history, but it was a force no society could ignore. And perhaps that is why these stories matter so much now, because they are not only about the past, they are warnings, written in abandoned plazas, empty cliff dwellings, and quiet mounds beneath modern skies. So what was the climate disaster that changed ancient America? It was not one storm, not one famine, not one year of suffering. It was the gradual betrayal of the natural patterns people had built their worlds around. It was drought in places where every seed mattered. It was unstable rainfall in farming heartlands. It was flood, scarcity, migration, and the slow collapse of confidence in systems that no longer worked as they once had. It was the grinding pressure that forced communities to leave ceremonial centers, abandon fields, relocate villages, and invent new ways to live. It changed architecture, it changed politics, it changed religion, it changed where people lived and how they understood their place in the land. And perhaps most importantly, it changed memory, because later generations inherited not only the land, but the aftermath. They inherited stories of places once central and now silent. They inherited sacred geographies altered by movement. They inherited fragments of older worlds, whose full meaning would fade over time, especially after the upheavals of colonialism added new layers of loss and forgetting. Ancient America was shaped not only by its greatest builders and astronomers, but by those who survived environmental crisis and carried civilization forward in altered forms. That is the hidden power of this story. The disaster changed everything, but it did not end everything. If this story changed the way you see ancient America, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for the next chapter, because the greatest mystery is not only how these civilizations rose or even how climate helped transform them, it is why so many people today barely remember they existed at all. In episode 8, we explore that forgotten legacy and why America forgot its first civilizations. And once you hear that story, you may never look at the American past the same way again.